Hello, and I want to welcome you to what will be the last in our current series this year, looking at issues around dementia. The aim of this series has always been to look at this disease from different angles. Over the year, we have spoken to health and legal professionals. We've asked questions about what we might do or what we might be able to do in the event of a dementia diagnosis. And we've spoken to people living with the disease and also to their carers and loved ones. We first met Jules in Ireland last year during the World Federation Biennial Conference, and she very kindly shared with us the story of her husband Wayne, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's back in 2018. And she spoke really movingly about their subsequent 4-year journey together, along with his maid, assessor, and provider, the fantastic Dr. Tanya Dawes. I recall listening to that presentation and thinking what an extraordinary and brave couple they were, and how fortunate they were to have been working with Dr. Dawes. So here we are, a year later, a year after the conference, and I wanted to catch up with Jules and with Janie Lazar, the chair of End of Life Ireland, and it has to be said, the driving force behind those wonderful few days in Dublin. And I wanted to hear what's happened since then. I know, for example, Jules has been working on putting together an educational package, an educational resource, and that includes her one-act play, which she hopes can be used in a range of settings to assist conversations around dementia. So today I'm here to listen and to learn. And I'm going to hand over to Janie's and Jule and let them bring us up to date with Wayne's legacy. So Janie, over to you.
Peter, thank you very much for that. That's really lovely introduction. Jule, hello. It's lovely to see you again. It seems really since we first met in goodness 2022, we've spoken regularly, and Peter, you touched on the whole aspect of learning. And I think for anybody who hasn't had a direct involvement with somebody who is living with dementia and their loved ones, it's very, very hard to fully appreciate what that can be like. And right from the start, you've been very honest with me. You've shared all of your own experience, your learning, and that led on to really where we're at today, which will be going into further, if you like, a reflection on that journey and also how it's developed into what has become Wayne's legacy. And I thank you really from deep inside, because the learning has been immense and it continues. Seeing you develop, if you like, creatively, what has become an educational tool that is going to be of immense value is really, really exciting. And I think Wayne himself would be dead chuffed to know that this was happening. I sadly didn't know Wayne, but I've got a good sense of him through you. But if I can just go back a little bit, one of the things that you did with Wayne was to record in note form, but also audio recordings, your conversations, because you knew that they would be of value not only to yourselves in tracking the progression of the disease, but also of value to the doctors and the specialist clinicians who were involved with you. And from that led that book was called Shared Conversations. And it was from those shared conversations that in our conversation, the one-act play, 10 Minutes to Midnight, came into being. Can you take me back to that point? Because that really was, as well as the recordings and the notebooks, the realization of Wayne's legacy, because then it could go out into the wider world as a learning tool.
Yeah, and Janie, first of all, it's always a delight to see you and to speak. We've had many conversations, and they've all been so special. And Peter, once again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to, to share the story. Shared Conversations came out in 2022, in the spring of 2022, and I happened to have gone to a little children's play. It was Beauty and the Beast, and it was local theater. And I came back so amazed at how gifted and creative these young kids were, right? And I came home that night and I thought, there's also our theater, Echo Players Theater, has one act play presentations in the fall. It's also a competition, and I thought, one act play. I can take my book. I can create a one act play. I had no idea. I went online. What's a one act play have, etc. And I started to look through the book, and I actually took chapters, because the way that book is written, for those of you who've had an opportunity to look at it, it's almost like a play. It's, me speaking, Wayne speaking, and so on. And so there's the roles, there were the lines, and I added a narrator. And yeah, and I was really excited about that. And I thought, oh, I'll try and enter it as a local festival kind of thing. But then I realized, no, the festival, you do your play, it's 30 minutes, or my play would take 30 minutes, okay, to read out. But it was, you needed time to introduce, you needed time to, do the play, and then you needed a time to reflect with the audience. And that was not the venue, I realized, for this play. And so began our conversation, and I was going to call it Shared Conversations, etc. And Janie, I remember you saying, hey, wait a minute, you have a line in there that you use a lot. And I'm thinking, okay, finally, I think you even had to tell me what it was, right? And because when you're in the thick of it, you just don't see it. And it was 10 minutes to midnight. And that's how the play developed. And then I sort of, played with it. The timing wasn't quite right with things that were going on to, find, people, let's go ahead with it. And so it really took on a life of its own, at the theater, at the Lexicon Theater. Okay, and 2 or 3 days before our conference in 2024, our conference last year. And it was it was amazing just to watch how this could be. But throughout this whole process, once I got the idea of the play, you were so encouraging, and you could see that, again, you sort of affirmed what I felt. It's a play that can be used for medical people, specifically, for people, the general audience. And then I got the idea of thinking it could also be a fundraiser, so that we could do towards dementia, towards something like Maid House, which Bridge C14 has. Yeah, so I'll stop there and just see what I've missed or what you want to add.
Okay, I just want to backtrack a little bit because it is a very personal play. And one thing that I found, if you like, coming from the point of view of advocacy, is that people are very reluctant to talk about uh, their experience of living with Alzheimer's or let's say dementia. And by having the play, what it did do was give the opportunity not only to talk about dementia, living with dementia, tracking the progression of a disease, but also it gave people who came permission to talk about assisted dying. And it's the one thing that, even though, particularly in countries where there isn't any legislation for assisted dying, or MAID, as it's known in Canada, medical assistance in dying, it's important to give people that opportunity and permission. And what we quickly found as we set the stage, and it was wonderful having you here as somebody who had lived through the progression of that disease with your husband, for people then to be able to ask you questions directly. So very briefly, the play, 30 minutes, it's something that doesn't need preparation for as such. There are two people, two readers, and a narrator. And the audience can see and feel what is happening between the words, if you like, in the silences. And I think that was the powerful thing. So it's a reenactment of a segment of your life with Wayne that every person who was living with somebody with dementia and somebody who had dementia themselves, but still conscious enough to be able to realize where they were at with their disease, could relate to as well. And it is those difficult moments and the progression of the disease highlighted in the interaction between the two readers representing you and Wayne. And that was what was so powerful. So to have it as a tool, I suppose what I'm saying is it opens up that conversation. It opens up the conversation.
Right. And I think about it, I took the little background to that, you know, to the recording. My niece, Kashmir, who you met, and she also spoke at the conference, and she was doing at the University of uh, Vancouver Island University. I'm trying to get all these things straight. And she was taking fine arts, and she ended up going to global studies. But she was also interested in recording, and she had a little project that she needed to do for her course. And she said, "Do you mind if I just ask you some questions?" and so on. And Wayne and I looked at her and said, "Oh, that was fine." So that was the birth of that too, of getting the things going. And Tanya had also mentioned at one time, you know, if I had a sense of what was happening to my patients, you know, when I met them, you know, when I was talking with them, that would be so helpful. So I knew where they were coming from. So I sort of mentioned that to Tanya in one of our follow-up, you know, meetings that we had, and that kind of spurred on. And so that made me think, oh, I have my cell phone. I can record because I have recorded other things. And so Wayne and I talked about it, and I asked him, and he said, no, that was fine. And you always usually have your cell phone with you. So when there were certain moments when Wayne was at his best, we had discussions around quality of life, right? And what does it mean? Discussions about around, and this is this part in the play as well that I took from the book. Questions around how are you today? Because any of us go to the doctor, go to the dentist, whatever it is, you come in. How are you today? I'm thinking, why am I here? All of a sudden, I feel okay. And you know, Wayne living in the moment. And I think people in dementia, and it's just something that I'm just kind of, you know, sometimes you have these realizations. It was, yeah, right now I feel okay. So he would say, oh, I'm fine. And I'm thinking, no, this isn't quite, you know, accurate. It may be for the moment. And so that's what spurred me on to, you know, getting these glimpses of what was going on for him. And then there were times when it was very emotional. We were talking about things walking along the, you know, along the beach, and I would take that you know, conversation. And again, you alluded to the fact it was very helpful for Wayne because he said, wow, I remember now, like, because those were things that they were in his mind and out of his mind. So it was a journey for him too. It gave him, I think, a standpoint, some grounding where, okay, this is really what's happening to me. And so that was valuable. Also, when I look back at those conversations, and I did the transcripts, went to Dr. Dawes, to Tanya, because it's too much to, you know, to listen that way. And so in a sense, you lose a bit of the emotional part, but those transcripts are not not the transcripts, but the recordings are there. And you and I talked about where we might go with those particular ones, because it really it's really like being the fly on the wall. If you use that expression, you're right there seeing what happens. So I have so much respect for Wayne, and so much, just applaud the courage that he had to be able to listen again to things that were happening to him and get reflected back. And he was so generous with wanting to do this. And right from the get-go, there was permission. I also want to say that throughout the recordings, I would go back to when he was saying, there was the one section where, and where do you think you are right now on your journey? And he would mention, and I said, and when it comes to this, what is it you want? I never came out and said, I think it's time for me. I was always very conscious about the fact that it was for him to come up and to be able to say that. And then I'd say, well, then I would say, yeah, that is something we talked about, and the plans are there, and maybe refresh a little bit. But again, I know I'm accenting this because I think in this day and age, it's important with all the misinformation that people are being forced into things. No, it wasn't that. And as I said, that one part in the book where he had said to me, it was after he had been assessed formally and he had to think about when his date, when do I want made? And he was in the shower and he said, hey, come quickly. I have something to tell you before I forget. And I can just see the animation and the big grin on his face and the seriousness. It was a bit of everything. And I, at that time, was thinking, oh my gosh, what's happening? And he said, and with his hand, I want you to remember that when I make my decision, I don't want anyone changing my mind. So that was also affirmation for me too. It was because you sit there and you think, oh, wow, should I be discouraging this? But again, what is really important is that we are all individuals and we all need to recognize choice and where we are. And no matter what our feelings are about something, it's not about us. It's about the person that's living and going through that. Does that help? Or
It it does, and Wayne was always very clear from the start. I mean,
right.
Jules, you were married for 52 years.
Yeah.
You knew each other so well, and you in our various conversations, you've always said that because you maybe taking notes and where, if you like, tracking the progression of the disease, because the two of you had been involved in education, it came more naturally to be able to do that with each other's permissions and wanting to be able to be, if you like, helpful to the assessors as well, the doctors and geriatrician who was working with you. But I know when at different times as the disease progressed, it became increasingly difficult. As you say, you would never propose that you were at a certain stage together. And it was for him to state how he felt at different stages. But now looking back, and I know you'll have read notes and played back different recordings for various purposes as you've developed different applications of this for training purposes. How do you feel now looking back? Because I think for people who are on this journey, that's one of the hardest things to recognize where somebody is at. Because as you said, you'd ask Wayne, how are you? And he'd say, fine, because at that moment he was. There would be other moments where he wasn't, and he wasn't sure who you were.
Mhm.
And those moments, I know from what you've said, were incredibly hard. I can't imagine what that must have felt like. But to go on and um, work with those moments so that it can be helpful in the training to other people is a remarkable achievement. But looking back, how do you feel when you consider how long you were together and knowing the man he was and the man he became?
Yeah, you know, there is that, you know, that time for reflecting. I just come back and I just feel so grateful that we were able to do this journey together, that he would have done that for me, that I was his companion. Okay, that's what I felt like. I never felt like the caregiver, in all honesty. And I had said that before. And Wayne, and I digress just a little bit, but I still remember Wayne saying, you know what? I've lived a good life. My life is good. It's not the same anymore. You have life to live and you will be okay. You know what I mean? He would come through and to say that. Those are things that you don't want to hear, but you accept them, and then you look and you think, "Oh my gosh, how kind, okay? How considerate, how compassionate you are," because it was like a two-way street. You know, we reflected each other. And even with the dementia, we still continued to hike, to camp, to do those things that were beautiful. We were never real social people. We had a few, you know, good friends and so on, but we always did things together. And I also want to say, had I not taken my courses in communication, it was, you know, conflict res and mediation with the Justice Institute in BC, years ago, I don't know if any of this would have happened, because I wouldn't have had the skills to be curious, to ask the questions instead of, oh, no, don't say that. You really want to do this, right? And I had lots of practice with my students. You know, that was the playground for
Mhm.
it. Found your own language, your own expression. And I still think, and again, going back, you know, to gratitude, because we were able to have discussions because of the fact of what I had learned. And I also feel that in that book, I'm hoping that there's real clues to how to communicate, not just with someone who has dementia, but on a general scale, you know, with people that you care about, with people that you meet. This idea of being curious and listening and asking
Mm.
questions that are, you know, not yes, no answers. That made a world of a difference. Oh, and going back to how I felt, okay, I digressed. I just, as I said, I felt really blessed. I felt honored. Um, this was a journey we were in. It wasn't like, oh, I want to be out of this. Yes, there were times when I walked out and slammed the door, came back, and felt really bad when he said, I'm so sorry that I made you feel that way. And no, it's not about you. It's about me. I guess the sense of, for Wayne, the waiver that we talked about gave him that sense of control. And I think no matter who you are, if you are, you know, challenged with something that can take away or rob your autonomy, you want to feel that there's that sense of control in some ways, and those are things that made such a big difference. But there was always that loving, caring relationship. He was funny. I mean, we had some really good, you know, chats, and you know, there's a sense of humor, and I think that's the other thing. You have to find humor in things. This is the way it is, so you can't change it. So going back, it didn't feel, when you're in something, I guess you don't realize what you're going through. I mean, I journaled, and when I look back at the journal, and I thought, oh, that's kind of what I wrote. That's what I was feeling a little bit, because that sort of gets folded into all the other things that are happening. And the big learning for me a year later was the fact that, I really was a dementia death doula. This was what I was doing. I couldn't have had any more training than you know, taking courses. This was real life, and yeah, and I think he also was an example for people around him. And again, people that would look and say, he seems okay. You know, like, how do you? Yeah, and people mean well. They really mean well. So, and it's the person that you get to know on a more intimate basis. I was blessed because Wayne never really lost his insight. All right. That was rare. He never really lost his insight. He'd lose, for a while, but it would come back, and it became more serious the summer of 2022, and that led us to him, getting formally assessed. But yeah, so that was a blessing. That was a blessing. So, and I need to do something with this. It needs to be shared. And again, and I think that we were going to call it. He was all in favor of a book because I'd written a couple of other books related to loss and grief. And he said, it's not insight into Alzheimer's, it's glimpses into Alzheimer's. And that's the way, yeah, it's glimpses. Does how does that answer? Have I answered what you've asked, or do I have to?
Well, you have, and I think the interesting thing for me is that, when you look back, Wayne was 73 when he was diagnosed. Then you had the 4-year journey, and now you're at a particular landmark stage of your life,
Yes.
and being able to use everything that you learned during that journey, I think has added another layer of richness, because you're now working with other healthcare professionals and being able to put this to good use. And hopefully what we'll do within a very short time is make this resource available through the World Federation as well, and with guidelines on how best to use it, so that it can be used as we did in Ireland just before the 2024 conference, as if you like, a workshop to involve members of the public, but also to develop it in another way that can be used for healthcare professionals to count as, if you like, a CPD accredited training, but also to encourage the conversations between people, I would imagine, in a disciplinary, I can never say that word, team, which seems to be the approach that is taken for somebody when they've received their diagnosis. So I think it's a wonderful tribute to the work that you've done. I won't in this conversation go into all, if you like, your journey, because we have some marvelous talks with you that we'll put up the links in the bio. When you spoke at the conference, when your beautiful niece Kashmir spoke at the conference, coming from the position of what legislation for assisted dying meant to you as a family. So from a younger person's perspective, and also there's a conversation from the conference of you with your doctor. And I think all of these together with, if you like, the toolkit to use 10 minutes before midnight and your talks are such a wonderful, wonderful gift to us all. And for those, I thank you. And I know we'll be having more conversations.
One thing that I wanted to say is that this journey, early in the journey, within the first year, I wrote that little book, The Hot Chocolate and Decadent Cake Society, a memoir, Alzheimer's and the Choice for Made, because I felt alone. I didn't feel there was anybody, any group I could turn to. Yes, there was the Alzheimer's Society in BC, but they were still fence sitting. All their courses were aimed at getting you into a home care, into a care home, right? Nothing to do with a personal choice and wanting to, and even when this was 2018, and MAID became legal in 2015 or 2016, sorry. And so there wasn't a place for me. I mean, they've come around 180 degrees, and Jennifer Lyle, who I think still is their CEO, is a wonderful person. And because I was saying that there's a missing link. We need to get people. We need compassionate support for people who want to make that choice, not push them into things that they don't want. Yeah, and so now, and you and I in our discussion even last week, you made a really interesting comment that the seeds have been planted. I got to a point where I'm not knocking my head against a brick wall. If you don't want to hear, that's fine, okay. And going, being the educator, going into the conferences and speaking is something I enjoy doing, and that was my way of being able to work through things, songwriting and so on. And so what I'm saying is that, like, I'm available for people who want to FaceTime with me, to, invite me to talk, because to me now, my goal is Wayne's legacy. And, you in your life, you move on a little bit and work. And it's interesting how there's still similarities, right? So, but I needed to have that, to say that, to make the point that it can be a lonely journey, when you want an organization to offer something to help. And it even makes it more heartbreaking when you know that you're on the right track and that needs to be shared and they're blocked, okay, because they can't get past um, whatever they're thinking and, whatever they're prepared to
Mhm.
do. I don't know if I'm putting it in that way, but that was important. That was important to be able to say today because, yeah. And so you become stronger and you find ways. My first little calling card was if a door closes, a window opens. And and I guess that's been my life.
Yeah, I like that. It's interesting, I suppose. What one final point that I think is worth uh, really reinforcing is this whole aspect of being supported at home. I think on a previous session, Peter, you had Carmel Gagan and Helen Rochford Brennan from Ireland talking about living with Alzheimer's. Helen herself has Alzheimer's. But what they are campaigning for always and advocating for is that support to be as independent as possible in one's own home and in supported in one's community, and to
Right.
have one's wishes supported. Whereas I think because people aren't talking enough about how best to deal with it at home, if you have a partner, especially,
That's right.
the tendency, I think, for any health authority is we'll have to find a home. And that's generally not what the person themselves wants. They want to
And I
stay with
think
what's familiar, what's reassuring. And that really is so important.
I also think, too, this idea of having an advocate for that person who has Alzheimer's or dementia, letting them be involved. It's about them. And back 20, even, no, it was 2021, okay, that I created a workshop because I was frustrated with not getting anything, provincially. And it was called Compassionate Support for those with Alzheimer's, looking to explore MAID and for their support people. And we had Elder College, which was all volunteers, and you were 55 and over, and people that did facilitated workshops. And I'm so grateful. And it was through the University of Vancouver Island. It's now changed to Mid Island College, Elder College, because they lost the funding because of funding. But in that workshop, I had people that came. Wayne participated in that, which was really neat. And it was there were 4 2-hour sessions, and the people that came, they were actually health professionals. There was only one person with dementia, and that was Wayne. And it was neat how they learned so much from him, and he felt so validated. Like, I'm not put to the side, and so that was, yeah, that was a wonderful thing. And so he participated right from the beginning. He was always involved. It was always, with his permission. Are you okay with this? Whatever. Yeah, and they were blown away about how he was. And again, that's because he had that insight. There's a little difference, but I think even if you don't have the insight all the time, there's got to be ways of communicating effectively with love. That's it.
with love and care. And it really is the lived experience. And without the lived experience, legislators can't do the best job. They have to listen to the lived experience. And I think for us as advocacy groups around the world, to be able to use the materials that you are giving us to help further that understanding. And certainly so much information has come from Canada. I know Canada gets a lot of criticism, which I think is totally unfair, because I think you're leading the way in helping others understand,
Oh, for sure.
really understand. It's the wishes of an individual that count more than anything. So from the bottom of my heart, across to Vancouver yet again, Jule, thank you very much. And Peter, thank you for facilitating yet another session on this topic.
Actually, I think I really need to thank both of you. I had a very easy job today, a very enjoyable job to sit and listen to both of you and the discussion, which was fantastic. And Jules, it really is a testament to the strength of the relationship that you had with Wayne, that you've been able to create these works, which are now going to be shared with the rest of us. So, I mean, for that, I think we have to thank you. And as Janie said, you've actually created a safe space for people to talk about dementia. I mean, I'm really aware that over this year, as I become more aware of the topic, just how difficult it is for people to just get into that space and to have that conversation. So I really hope that anyone who does come by and listen to today's conversation can take away a little bit of hope and positivity that can still come out of really what can be quite the darkest places and times in people's lives. So for that also, I think we need to thank you. And again, it's not just all about positivity. As you say, there's some real life work come out of what you've done, the toolkits that you are putting together, the works that you've done, the play. I mean, these can all be used by advocacy groups like ourselves, professionals, and so on. And I really hope they take time to pick those up. And for anyone who's interested, we will post those links when we have them. And Jules, I know you're always happy, as you say, to pick up the conversation with whoever wants to stop by. So again, we really appreciate that as well. So I'll close now by saying thank you, Jules. Thank you, Janie. And my dogs, thank you as well. I don't know if you can just hear.
Can't hear my
We're doing this live. I do feel that we've actually rounded out this year's webinars in fitting style. So until we get a chance to meet again, to both of you, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janie.
Till soon.